Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today, we're going to be revising an Inspector Calls of my Act 2 revision quiz. Before we get going, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are plenty of things on the channel to help you revise the play. Okay, my quiz for Act 2. Question number 1. Who is the first character to be investigated by the Inspector in Act 2? Is it A, Mrs. Birling? Is it B, Gerald? Or is it C, Eric? Question number 2. Eric's friend Charlie Brunswick went away for 6 months and left his set of rooms, his flat, to Gerald while he goes away. Where did he go? Did Charlie Brunswick go to the USA? Did he go to France? Or did he go to Canada? Question number 3. What is the name of the place where Gerald met Daisy Renton? Is it A, the Castle Bar? Is it B, the Palace Bar? Or is it C, the Old Fort Pub? Question number 4. Sheila is angered by Gerald. What does she suggest he was to the girl? Is it A, a fairy prince, or is it B, a trifle impertinent? Number 5. After hearing about the affair, what does Sheila say she has? Is it A, disgust for Gerald? Is it B, anger towards Gerald? Or is it C, respect for Gerald? Question number 6. After telling his story, Gerald asks to do what? So he's spoken about his involvement in the death of the girl, his relationship with her, his part of the story. And after that and finding out all about that from him, Sheila gives him back the engagement ring. At that point, what does he ask to do? Is it A, go out and be alone? Is it B, go and find a police officer to speak to ensure that the Inspector Gould is who he says he is? Or is it C, he wants to pour himself a drink? Question number 7. Mrs. Birling speaks about Eric, who the inspector says he'll want to be speaking to. What does she call Eric when she speaks to the inspector? Is it A, that child? Or is it B, a boy? Question number 8. Mrs. Birling works for a charity that gives money to young women in need. What is the name of that charity? Is it A, the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation? Is it B, the Brumley Charity Organisation for Women? Or is it C, the Women of Brumley's Charity Organisation? Question number 9. What does Mrs. Birling think should happen to the father of the child that Eva Smith was carrying? Is it A, that person should be sent to prison? Is it B, that they should be shamed? Or is it C, nothing? And lastly, number 10, who is it that realises that Eric is the father first? Is it Mrs. Birling that puts all the pieces together and realises that Eric is the one who is the father? Is it B, Sheila, or is it C, Mr. Birling? Okay, we've had 10 questions. We're going to review the answers now. Feel free to make some notes. Correct any answers you got wrong and add to your understanding with some of the analysis from me. Number 1, who is the first character to be investigated by the inspector in Act 2? Well, the first character to be investigated by the inspector is Gerald. At the end of Act 1, Gerald tells Sheila that he wants to keep the truth from the inspector, and that's not something that Sheila is in favour of. And then the inspector arrives to speak to Gerald before the curtain goes down for the end of Act 1. So Act 2 begins with the inspector speaking to Gerald about his involvement in the death of the girl. He's, of course, known her as a different name. She's using the name Daisy Renton at the time that Gerald meets her. So Gerald's part of the story is how we begin Act 2. Eric's friend Charlie Brunswick went away for 6 months and left his set of rooms to Gerald. Where did he go? He went to Canada. So that's another wealthy, affluent and privileged young man who owns a flat, but it's called a set of rooms in this text, and has given the keys to Gerald while he's away. So that's where Gerald has kept Daisy Renton. He's let her stay there and he's kept her as his mistress, having a secret affair with her whilst he's in a relationship with Sheila. The name of the place where Gerald meets Daisy Renton is the Palace Bar. We'll return to the Palace Bar later when Eric speaks about his involvement with Daisy Renton. So the Palace Bar is where he meets her. There's an irony here. It is not a palace. Their lives are not a fairy tale. The young women who work there and are taken advantage of by very wealthy and privileged men. We've got this interesting opposition of fantasy versus reality. So we've got the characters here living in a fantasy world and not facing reality. And we've got this real misery of the life of the girl in question, which is clearly at odds with the idea of a fairy tale ending. Sheila's angered by Gerald. What does she suggest he was to the girl? Well, she says, "You were the wonderful fairy prince. You must have adored it." Now, this is interesting because also she would have seen Gerald as her fairy prince, and she was living a life of fantasy and was not aware of reality and was metaphorically blind. At this point, her eyes are wide open and she can see the truth. Unlike her parents, who do not want her to have this spell broken. They don't want her to be there while the inspector speaks to Gerald. Be a trifle impertinent. Well, that's said by Mrs. Birling when she speaks to the inspector. She can't believe the way the inspector speaks to her in such a forthright and formal tone, and she says that he is a trifle impertinent. After hearing about the affair, what does Sheila say she has? Well, she may well be disgusted and angered by what he's done, but she actually says she respects Gerald because at this point in the play, she can see him for who he really is, and he has told the truth. So she's got some respect for him, although she does give the ring back and at that point calls off the engagement. Number 6, after telling his story, Gerald asks to do what? Well, he actually asks to go out and be alone. He says that he needs to go out and collect his thoughts. He's just heard that the girl has died. He shared his story about his relationship with her, and he's just had his engagement to Sheila broken off. He needs to go out and be on his own. Now, he actually goes out and finds a police officer at this point. So rather than actually collect his thoughts and have some time alone, he does actually go out and find a police officer to inquire about the identity of Inspector Gull. C, pour himself a drink. It's not the right answer, but he does do that in Act 1 when he hears that the girl has changed her name to Daisy Renton. Number 7, Mrs. Birling speaks about Eric, who the inspector says he'll want to speak to. What does she call him? She says he's just a boy when they speak about his drinking. The inspector, of course, says he's not a boy, he's a young man, and some young men drink too much. This idea that Mrs. Birling doesn't see her children as adults and doesn't think that they should take responsibility for their actions or their place in society is reoccurrent in the play. That child is what she calls Sheila in Act 1 when Sheila is upset about the death of Eva Smith. So the idea that Mr. and Mrs. Birling treat Sheila and Eric as if they're children is something that is recurrent. That is a reoccurring thing in the play. What is the name of the charity that Mrs. Birling chairs? It's the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation. And if you want to remember that, here's the way that I do it. Brumley Women's Charity Organisation, big white chocolate orange. What does Mrs. Birling think should happen to the father? Well, she actually says that he should be shamed. She talks about a public example being made of him. And of course, if a public example was made of Eric, that would likely be something that would damage the Birling brand. It would be something that could lead to a dent in the chances for Mr. Birling's knighthood. Number 10, who is it that realises that Eric is the father first? It's Sheila, and she says, "Now, mother, can't you see?" And that idea of sight and metaphorical blindness is being alluded to there in that moment. Okay, check out the other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content. Feel free to ask something you'd like to see me cover in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share, and keep revising.